panelists this evening that will really shed a lot of informative light, and then we'll go into Q&A. And so what you'll see in the chat, first is a sign-in sheet where if you can just let us know that you're here so we can know who's been coming to the conversation. Many of you have been coming back every other week, and we appreciate that. But just make sure that you sign in. And then also there is a link in the chat where if you have specific questions for our panelists, you can drop them there. And staff are synthesizing those questions to send to me, and then I'll report those back out at the end of the evening. What I'm excited about for tonight is many of the questions that have come in over the last few weeks we'll be able to bring to light this evening, because this is really our focus on schools. Our first was a general conversation, really in response to everything that was happening around race relations nationally. But then we moved into a student focused conversation. Our last conversation was around parent perspective. And then this evening, it's really focused around school insight. So before we jump into our panelists for this evening, I do want to mention that we have a special guest, Dr. Cashwell. I have been so appreciative of Dr. Cashwell being such a fan of what's happening and coming from such an honest and supportive space of the conversation that we've been having. And so while I've been privy to know that she's been tuning in and has been listening and has read the comments, whether Instagram, things that we send over, and I also know that she's moving forward to just speak with staff and what our next steps look like. I wanted to provide an opportunity for us to join us here, although she's had a busy day as well with a few announcements that have come out, but just to share her support and any other comments with our attendees here this evening.
Thank you, Adrienne, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend a few moments bringing greetings to everyone. And I promise not to be too long-winded because you have a phenomenal panel to be able to hear from this evening, and I want to leave plenty of room for them to share their insights and expertise. But first of all, want to thank you for hosting these community conversation events. The series has been outstanding, and as you've mentioned, I've been tuned in along the way, and to this venue and others where conversations like this are taking place. They're critical. So thank you for this space, and thank you to not only the panelists, but everyone who's present. I heard Adrienne mention some of you are returning from multiple parts of the series. This may be your first time, but I want to thank you for being, again, a part of that conversation, whether you're a staff member, a community member, student, parent, or stakeholder. Being here and being part of the conversation is of the utmost importance, and it's the only way that we're going to be able to move forward on the work that we've committed to as a school division, and that's having your voice and your perspectives present as part of an ongoing dialogue. And so I want to thank you for first being here, and furthermore for challenging us to look within, to look at every aspect. I know these have focused on the student experience, the staff experience, and there's so many facets to be examined as we really, again, study all angles and think about how we can be open to change and what actions need to come as a result of this conversation. And Adrienne pointed to that. Really, important to me that I work with the staff team and those who have been a part of facilitating these conversations and hearing the perspectives, that we begin to put plans into action and next steps. So it's taking action. So when we say that we're committed to issues around equity and race, we've got to show that we can put that into action. So that's not lost on me. I think this staff has that shared goal, of providing a culturally responsive, inclusive environment for our students and our staff. And so that means we simply cannot lose sight of issues of racial equity in particular. And I know that's what these conversations have centered around. So thank you for being here. Again, the critically important dialogue. And if you're new to the conversation, I hope you'll come again. I know that there will be many opportunities ahead. And for those of you who have been a part of this along the way, thank you for staying with us on this very important journey that we're taking together. It is a community commitment, and we've got to do our part as schools, but that partnership with the community is so important. So as I said, I'll try to not be long-winded, though this is an incredibly important topic to me, because I know I want to leave room for you, again, to hear from the experts who will be part of your great panel today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Cashwell, just for being here, providing that support, because it makes a difference, you know, when you have leaders who support the work and beyond the conversations, the actionable steps. So thank you so much for that. And as you mentioned, we will move on to our panelists for this evening. And so we have 4 different staff who represent our school communities. We have Dr. Noel, who is our Director of Student Support and Disciplinary Review. We also have Dr. Monica Manns, who is our Chief Diversity, Equity, Opportunities Officer. We have Ashley Waddell, who's an LCSW, and she's a school social worker. And then we also have Jonte Scott Mayo, who is a school counselor. And so what's been really interesting throughout these last few weeks is most of the questions point towards schools, right? And so while we're really, we know the importance of partnerships and that shared buy-in, right? We know that a lot of responsibility falls in our schools. What I was really excited about as I was talking to panelists is that a lot of the work has been happening. And so I think we're just deeper into the continuation of that work. And so what we'll do, I'll speak to all of our panelists for a few minutes. Again, if you have questions, send them in through the chat. And we're actually going to start with Dr. Noel. So I will wait to see if you can unmute yourself, Dr. Noel. We'll see if you can get on the main screen.
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
You're unmuted? Okay.
Yeah, but it says my camera's video sharing disabled by administrator.
Oh, man. Well, look, we can hear you. You all can hear Dr. Noel, correct? Well, we will envision your face, but we can absolutely hear your voice, so it's fine. So, Dr. Noel, thank you so much for being here. As I stated earlier, you are our Director of Student Support and Disciplinary Review. Yes. And that means a lot. And so while I know everyone here may not know what that entails, so can you just share just your department and what you all are responsible for?
Certainly. It's almost like if you envision Congress, you have 2 houses, House of Representatives and the Senate. So over on the SSDRO, you have the student support side, where we provide supports and interventions for students to help them make better decisions so they won't have to come to the other side of our house, the disciplinary review side, where we would have hearings for students who are long-term suspended or students who are recommended for expulsion. The goal here in our office is to change that unwanted behavior so that students make better decisions to help them down the road. And because simply suspending a student and expecting them to come back better than they left without teaching them something is not going to work. So, and that's more about punishment than about discipline. And discipline teaches and guides. And that's what we want. We want our students to learn from their past poor decisions and make sure that they are in class or learning where they should be and not out of school or in school suspension or whatever the case may be.
Absolutely. Thank you. I like that comparison with Congress. I'll have to take a mental note of that one. Yeah, well, I know as we've had conversations, and I remember one of my first interactions with you, we were at a school board meeting, and I think you were sharing out just some discipline numbers, and there were some they were significantly higher when you looked at Black males and when you looked at discipline. And so I wonder if you could just kind of speak to your experience around that. And even I know that you've worked to do some shifts with our discipline approaches. Could you just kind of speak to that a bit more, framed in this conversation around race and equity?
Yeah, what we see, the disparity when it comes to whether it's in-school suspension or out-of-school suspension, the disparity really lies in the D codes. And what I mean by that, disrespect, disorderly conduct, defiance, they are the most subjective codes of any code of student conduct, but the codes that are most widely used when it comes to that disparity. The good news about the new Code of Student Conduct. And I'll say this, Henrico has led Virginia in making our Code of Student Conduct more proactive and preventative. So much so that the state Code of Conduct really models after ours. We've removed so much of the legal jargon, the punitive language, and it's. I think you'll be pleased to see that the new code will remove any subjective, gender-specific, or culturally specific language from the code that would lead to any sort of disparity. But all of that is good to have in theory. It boils down to understanding each other's culture and understanding that we all have implicit bias. If you have a brain, you have bias. So there are some situations where that implicit bias will creep in and cause us to act and form decisions about someone based on what they look like or based on where they live. And we can't allow that to come in. We see that in some of our discipline places, and I see that as the hearing officer, one of the hearing officers for the county, where the situation may be different on one side of the county versus the other. And that sort of thing, and the code violation categories that we added a few years back really helped with dealing with that, because we wouldn't want a student who, let's say, was in possession of cigarettes, let's say that. In one side of the county, they get a couple of days of in school, and the other side of the county, they may get a day out of school. It can't be that great deal of disparity in it. It has to be somewhat, and that code violation category served as a rubric for our building level administrators when it came down to coming up with the appropriate consequence.
Okay. Okay. And so with this new approach, is it already in place, or are we in transition of adopting the new code?
A little bit of both. It's in place, the code violation category. That's been in place since, I guess, the 15-16 school year. But I go back before the board in August for a final review of the 2021 code, where the board, hopefully, fingers crossed, will approve the changes. The lion's share of the changes the board approved with their help and direction. I think we're going to come up with some really good forms, especially removing the subjective language and the culturally and ethnically specific language.
Okay. Okay. So also, Dr. Noel, something that's really come out of the conversation in the last few months is just around SROs, to have them on school campuses to not. And you see people on varying sides of the conversation. How is HCPS addressing the role of having SROs or police officers on school campuses? And just what have you seen from your perspective about just where we're going as a district?
Great question. Not too long ago, Chairman Cooper hosted a panel I was on about that very thing. We had a great panel, some Henrico police officers, state senators, Richmond School Board a member, and a professor from VSU. The role of police officers in our buildings, I'm 100% in favor of having them in there, as long as there's a clear line of delineation on our roles. And I tell resource officers as well as building administrators when I get a chance to speak with them that it's pretty clear. Our building administrators enforce the Code of Student Conduct. Our SROs enforce the Code of Virginia. So if a student in school refuses to take his or her hat off, don't call the resource officer to intervene, because that's not against the law. Now, there are times when a code violation will involve a resource officer. For example, if a student is in possession of drugs or alcohol, or a student is distributing drugs or alcohol, or in possession of a weapon, there are times when both parties will intervene and work on the case. But it's still a clear line of delineation when it comes to who's responsible for what. So as long as building administrators, unfortunately, we have seen in years past too many examples where, in my opinion, SROs in buildings, not in Henrico per se, just in general, will overstep their role if a kid is doing something in class, chewing gum, refusing to take their headphones off, refusing to stop talking. A police officer should not be called for a situation like that.
So it sounds like even beyond the initial question, what's the conversation like about who reports to who, whose responsibility is where, and making sure that even we at the school level are aware of how to direct certain concerns
The
and make them
SROs are hired and employed by the Henrico County Police Department. They are not Henrico Public School staff. They are in our buildings working collaboratively with our school staff. And one of the points I brought up, and I be remiss if I didn't speak on what Dr. Cashwell said about it's not enough just to have a plan. We have to put that plan in action when it comes to any of these matters. So it really comes down to, and the point I was going to make, when we have resource officers in our buildings, it's good to have those relationships. And anybody who's heard me speak or been around me for any time, they know I'm big on relationships. So to have that resource officer in our schools, it could definitely spawn a relationship with our students. Some of the students in our buildings, no matter what side of town you live on, may only have a relationship with police officers when an officer is unfortunately doing their job in their community. So they see them in a negative light. But if they have an opportunity to speak with them and realize that this is a person in a uniform, but not only that, it will give some of our police officers who unfortunately have only experience with certain roles with our students to see them in the school setting where they are thriving and contributing. So it's best, and it's what it's really about. And I know Dr. Mans can speak on this as well. It's a cultural disconnect that we have, and we have to bridge that and become more culturally responsive in not only our teaching but our relationships and everything. It's good to know about each other. If you don't know, you're going to make assumptions, and if you look at the news is going to help you make assumptions, which is going to play into that implicit bias. And sooner or later, that implicit bias is going to take over, and something negative is bound to happen.
Absolutely. Okay. So something else has come up as a question as we have been holding these conversations. But when you talk about implicit bias or even, unconscious bias, folks have asked about just the structure of our schools, barbed wires outside of particular schools, comparing the number of SROs in the East End versus the West End. Do you have any responses to any of that from where you sit?
That I cannot speak on. I'm not aware of what barbed wires on our schools, but what I understand, there's in my one resource officer. Sometimes there are two resource officers in our buildings, but as to where they are, I can't speak on that with complete certainty. So I would rather not say something and be incorrect.
That's fair. Yeah. Well, my last question for you, a bit more broad. Just thinking about the school to prison pipeline, what do you feel Henrico is doing to disrupt it? And then what could we be doing more of?
Well, certainly it goes back to removing all the criminal language from our Code of Student Conduct. When I started here in 2014, we had something in our code called habitual offender. And that's a legal term. So what that was is if a student did some middle of the road things and the principal felt that they wanted to take that student forward to SSDRO for a hearing, that student could come forward for long-term suspension or even possible recommendation for expulsion. So at the time, I spoke with my then supervisor, Dr. Hamlet, about that, and we came up with something called intervention-focused procedures. And what that is, before a student can be referred to our office for a hearing or anything like that, they have to have two face-to-face hearings at the building level. The first hearing is led by the assistant or associate principal with the staff, the parents, the students, come up with supports and interventions to help that student be successful. Now, the goal is to change unwanted behavior. So if after that first face-to-face, it works, then great, because that's what we want. But if it didn't, then there would be a second face-to-face meeting, this time led by the principal with other staff members, and the students come up with additional supports. And at that time, if the behavior didn't change and the student wasn't meeting our expectations, then that student could come forward for recommendation for expulsion hearing or even a long-term suspension hearing. But even on that, in Henrico County, like I said, I started here in 2014. In that time, I've only had one student who was truly expelled. Every student from that time to this time either went to one of our long-term, one of our alternative sites where they were able to continue their education. So that's not punitive. We don't want to punish. We want to discipline, but we want to educate them in the process.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Noel, for all of that insight. We could go on, but I think you definitely gave us a good grasp of where we are, and especially hearing that we're forward thinking when it comes to our discipline processes. So thank you. And Dr. Noel will stay on the call too for any Q&A later. So don't forget to
try to log off and log back on to see if my image is able to come up. So
okay.
If let me disappear, I'll be back.
Okay. Sounds good.
Thank you.
All right. So next up, Dr. Mans is on with us. Now, you're special because this is your second time coming back to be a panelist, right? We keep calling on you, but we say thank you. I know you are working tirelessly. You have been with a lot of these issues, and a lot just kind of, falls right in front of you. So thank you for making time for us this evening, Dr. Mans. So I'll jump in. And of course, I know a lot of the work that you've been doing, especially around support for teachers and mentoring and some of these small groups that are going on. But will you just kind of share what the district is doing to support teachers who want to challenge racism and even are looking at how do you teach history a bit differently? What are some things that HCPS is doing?
So after the George Floyd murder, I brought together a group of teachers who I don't normally engage with, African-American teachers, and I asked them what did they need from my office, because I did not want to make an assumption. And so they gave me some ideas, some thoughts, and I say not just teachers, I actually had other staff too, because my office, we serve primarily teachers, but I think about all the staff when we're having these conversations. And what I heard is that they needed a safe space to have some conversations and to get some things off their chest. And from that, we created ally groups. And the ally groups we started off with were primarily around African Americans or Black Americans. I like to say Black because my mom is Native American, so I'm just going to say, so if I interchange Black and African American, so be it. But we also had a number of people who wanted to ally with us. And so I like to call co-conspirators. And so I felt like they needed a conversation, but they didn't need to have the same conversation, because what was needed for my Black staff is that they wanted a safe space. So we created different affiliate groups. So we had a co-conspirator group. We had a Black Lives Matter group, and then we had another group that was my staff of color, and that was a third group that came about out of conversation where I had some staff reach out to me and say, I want to join, but where do I go? Like, which one do I end up at? And so we created a third one. And so that group, we ended up really serving as a healing circle. That's kind of how we approached it, really as a space of healing and talking and just kind of letting people have an opportunity to share what was on their minds and hearts. And then what we got from that group is they really wanted to keep doing it. So we decided to run a summer cycle cohort of it. And one of the things that I heard from the Black staff is that they really wanted work to be done around issues that were showing up at the schools, right? And so I felt that it was the time for us to create an action plan that was designed to meet and respond to what their particular needs were. And so that Black Lives Matter action group, they are actually putting together an action plan that I will be presenting to the DLT and to the school board around the top 4 to 5 areas that they've identified of needs that they feel. And again, it's not just teachers, but it's staff in general, that they really feel like we need to respond to. And in that, it's not only going to have those, but it's going to have objectives and very clear benchmarks, because that's what I heard from the staff members, that they wanted to know that there was true movement with this work. And so that there was accountability to that movement. My co-conspirators, they really just needed to do some work. right? They needed to do some work, and they wanted to be in the work, but they recognized that they just didn't know what they didn't know.
Yeah.
And so that group, we actually not only continued it, but we also created book studies around anti-racism. And so we are running about 8 book studies, but I call them action book studies, because there's one thing to do a book study, because everybody can do a book study, but we didn't need one more book study to happen. So at the end of our book study, there are very clear action items that need to come from it. And then you're going to be held accountable to the action items that you put forward, all those who participate. And so those are the book studies. Then there's the co-affiliate. I actually run the staff of color group. I'm in all of them, but this is the one I run. And in that group, again, we use that as just a safe space. Many individuals in that group have never shown up to any allyship space. And so they're just trying to figure out how to appropriately have the conversations around issues that they have encountered. They're trying to figure out, is it a microaggression? Is it an aggression? And I said, no, it's an aggression. And we're giving them some definitions of what that looked like. So in that particular group, I call them, that particular group is my healing group, and it's also my understanding group. And so they're not really at a point of where they're wanting to do action. They're just trying to understand kind of where they are in this journey. So those are the 3 groups that we've been running, along with our book clubs that we are. I call it our anti-bias books club series we are running. So I've been really excited about the work and the participation so far.
Awesome. And I think when I hear the work that you're doing, Dr. Mans, it really speaks to the importance of having a space. Despite all of the uprisings that are happening, I think we really have been intentional to carve out safe spaces, regardless of where you are at, on your journey. And so beyond that space, what I'm also hearing is connecting it to some actionable next steps, through our schools. And so I think that's something that's come up too through our conversations. I think hearing that is really key. Another thing that's come up, and I'll say to staff who are here, if you can drop it in. So you all, Monica came with a lot of information. It's a lot of layered content. And so if you all can drop the document that she has in the chat as well, if you all want to read over any of this, but just to share out loud, just some teachers have also just expressed concern over reporting other educators. So, when they're in a situation where they're feeling a bit of bias or just inequality in schools, where is their safe space to go with sharing that? And is there a specific chain of command that they can utilize to report such incidents?
So I'm happy. One of the things you all gave me, one thing about equity is everywhere. We don't really get like a really clear, like this is the road you're going to go down. So my questions were a lot of varied questions.
And we appreciate you.
It's fine. I don't like to say something that I haven't done my research on. So I went back and I actually asked the people, had some conversations around the work. So let me just start off by saying that particular question, it really first off starts with your principal. So based off of policy, if you have a concern, you go straight to your principal to tell them. Or you can now contact our compliance specialist and Title IX officer. This is a new position. So it's not like you missed out and you just didn't know to do it. It is a brand new position that we now have. And that I put that information in our document. And so you can email them, you can contact them. And they also have a statement of complaint. If you look in the document, if you click on it, which I've underlined, you can pull up the actual document and you can put the information in there. So I put all of that into the Google Doc that has the questions that I'm responding to. So it not only has the officer's number, but it also has the statement of complaint. You can send an email, call directly, so that they can follow up with that. And another thing that it is also based off of, I also put in the policy that goes along with it and the regulations, because I think that is important that you can go back to those policies and regulations just for your own personal reference about that. So that information is there. And if you ever have any questions or concern about that, please feel free to reach out to me. this does not live in my office. So let me be very clear with you. This does not live in my office. It actually lives in human resources. And so it is an offshoot of that particular department. But I wanted you all to really clearly know who to contact and who to call. So that's why I wrote it up.
Okay, awesome. Last question for you, Monica. So another hot topic has been just around curriculum. And again, this has been nationally. There have been, questions around curriculum. Is Henrico on trend with evaluating inclusion in curriculum to enhance learning experiences for all students?
This is how I want to put it.
You leaned in. I'm like, okay, what's she about to say?
Because if you know me, I am very honest. I will start off to say that this is a journey. And we are at the very beginning of this journey, right? And I think it would be disingenuous if I said we were further along than we are. I think that people have good intent, but intent does not mean, it does not actualize anything all the time, right? So I would say that one of my focuses this year is something called the Culturally Responsive Education Model Framework. We call it the CRIM. And it is the single number one focus of what my department will be working on. Now, let me just tell you, I got about 15 other focuses because that's what equity does. Cool. But if you say to me, what is my journey? It is the CRIM. And so just so you all can appreciate, it's a circular model. I'll actually put it in this document so you all can see it. But it talks about culturally responsive work, which is based off of Zaretta Hammond, which is CRT in the brain. And then around this circular module, there's about 5 spokes. And those spokes range from prejudice reduction to school empowerment, to knowledge construction, to content integration, to equity pedagogy. And those require a higher level of intentionality than just saying, oh, we're going to work on culturally responsive practices. Because if you know anything about this work, everything falls under culturally responsive practices. You'll be like, oh, I greeted the students at the door. I'm culturally responsive. Oh, I can pronounce their name. I should get a culturally responsive pass card. Like, no. Those are the minimum things that you should be doing just to be a good person and a good educator, right? And so I am unwilling to just say to you, oh, we're going to do culturally responsive practices. My job, or what I believe that I am pushing, is this idea of at the core of who we are, you should be those things. And then you should be working with intentionality around these particular spokes that are going on. And so what we are doing, we've been really working a lot on things like funds of knowledge, cultural awareness, ensuring warm demander attitudes. There's these things that are just kind of principles within the context of the middle. But now we are looking to make sure that all of our principles understand the bare minimum. So every single leader, with the exception of principals this year, and I'll tell this summer, are reading CRT in the brain. So that way we have a common foundational understanding of where we're beginning. The principals will start reading it in December because, to be very honest, they're going through a lot of changes. It's about to be a very long year, and out of respect for that, we've agreed to hold off and bring their things to them in December, and they're going to be working on it as well. And that again is the foundational book. But then there is all of these other elements that are going to be key to it. So that's part of your question. And the second part of the question is that, I get a lot of letters from a lot of parents. And what hurts my heart the most is I get a lot of conversations from a lot of students because I talk to my kids. I'm there, I talk to them, and I hear from them. And so we are obviously not doing a great job if all of them are saying the same thing. And we have to do better, period. So I'm not going to, there's no chase to it. It is what it is. Yeah. Now, we are hoping we are putting some things in place and putting some professional learnings. As of now, they are not mandatory. I can't, I have influence, I don't have power, right? So I can recommend people take these courses that we put together for them, but I cannot require them. But I do think that that is a first step in having it, because more people are signing up. And one of the things that I urge everybody who's on this call, if you're a parent, if you're a student, if you're an educator, or if you're a staff, which I still see as educators, because if you're in a building of education, then in some form you are an educator. So urge people to take the courses, because I can put the information out, but if no one consumes it, then it is a waste of time and energy. And so that's what I would say. I would say that we are beginning this journey. People are starting to ask questions. And I want to believe we will get better. And I do believe we will get better and move beyond intentionality into actuality.
Yes, indeed. Well, Monica, I thank you. I appreciate the transparency. And living in the world of engagement, I understand everything just kind of falls in your lap or crosses it, right? I think equity should become something that we just breathe and something that we do. And I believe that the efforts that you're talking about, just kind of decentralizing it a bit, and you're providing us tools and skills, but really it's on us to take it in, read it, digest it, and apply it. I really like what you're talking about with the are things required or recommended, and so hopefully we'll get to a point where things are a bit more required to just increase that common language. So thank you, Monica. I know we've had a few great questions to come in, and I know you'll stay on with us for any Q&A. So for our next two panelists, we are going directly into schools, counseling, and social work. And so I will start with Ashley Waddell, who is a social worker here with HCPS. I peek up because I'm an MSW too, and so I know a lot of your plight and your experiences. And Ashley, I just want to start with you, because when you look at our code of ethics, social justice is really a part of a social worker's code of ethics. So it's not an option, so to speak. It's a calling that we've chosen to do. If you could talk about that a little bit more from your perspective as a school social worker, and how social justice is really shown up for you and yourself, and even for your peers.
All right, thank you, Adrienne. I think it's important that we're having this conversation right now, because so many people in the Henrico County Public Schools community, they really don't know who we are as school social workers. So first, we are social workers, and yes, we do have a code of ethics. And our practice setting so happens to be in schools. So our clients are our students, our families, and our communities. So yes, we have an ethical responsibility and a duty to be anti-racist and anti-oppressive in all of our actions. So whether we are assigned to schools on the West End, or whether we're assigned to schools on the East End, historically, we have been speaking out and against systematic racism within our educational systems. So particularly within our Department of School Social Workers, over the past few months, we've been really strategic about advocating for who we are in the county, advocating for our positions, and advocating for those who we work with to really understand what it is that we do. We want to have our rights to be called to the table when district leadership is developing school-wide policies and procedures that directly impact our students and families. So one of the biggest accomplishments that we have as a department is that we've really been strategic about strengthening our own mental health and our own learning to have those difficult conversations. Because if we can't even have those difficult conversations as a department, how do you expect us to go out and have those difficult conversations in that school environment? So we have been meeting as a department. We have our own affinity groups that we established within ourselves. 3 courageous Black women in our department called together our Black social workers for us to have that safe space. Because as Black women, it gets hard sometimes explaining who we are, trying to just put on a facade when we're in a building and we can't express ourselves because we're labeled as an angry Black woman. So yes, we created our own space so that we could show up unapologetic and authentic.
I was muted. Thank you, Ashley, for giving that just a holistic view, of who you all are and what you all have been doing. And you talked on it a bit, but I'll ask the same question of Jonte when she's up. But when I think about some of the supports that our students have seemed to be yearning for, we just want them to know that you're there. Are there specific or any concrete supports being provided by school social workers that you would like to share out this evening, just for any parents or even young people who may be watching?
Yes. So again, we are a department of 32 master level mental health practitioners. Some of us are licensed clinical social workers, certified trauma specialists, and certified band instructors. And we know that we have our ethical responsibilities to be the voice for marginalized and oppressed groups. So again, this summer, our department came together because we knew that people were going to ask, well, where are school social workers? Are they showing up? Yes, we are showing up. So we formalized some concrete steps that we are willing and we're going to support our students and our families and our staffs with. So as a department, in addition to what we already do, our work did not stop. Even though schools shut down in March, our department is still running. We're still sitting in eligibility meetings. We're still sitting in child find meetings. We're still interviewing our parents. So in addition to that, we are committed to continue to provide school-based mental health supports, whether that be virtually, depending on what happens with school in the fall. But yes, we're still going to continue to provide those school-based mental health supports. We're looking at training our teachers and our staff in implicit bias, providing training on anti-racist practices in the classroom, continuing to go directly into our communities to provide families with school information and community resources, facilitating restorative circles, continue to advocate against over-identification of Black students in exceptional education, and continue to train our teachers and staff to effectively use trauma-informed approaches with our students. But we realize that as a department, we cannot do this work alone. We only have 32 social workers. We have 72 schools. Y'all can do the math. We don't have one social worker for every school, and that is the goal. So we are going to need you all to continue to advocate for us to be in every school. And again, thank you, Adrian, for giving us this platform to partner with your department and everyone else on the call, Gente and Dr. Mans and Dr. Noel. The school social work department, we want to partner with you. We are here. So please continue to invite us to all conversations when y'all are deciding, what's going to happen that directly impacts our students and our families.
Absolutely. Well, Ashley, we thank you for being here and for sharing all that you all are doing. And it's not unnoticed, the amount of effort that you all put in to making sure that we're connected to our students and also to our families too. So thank you for being on the panel. We're going to hop over to Jonte, who is one of our counselors. And so even when I look at our social workers, who may even be a bit more macro than our counselors are, Jonte has the privilege of working really closely with a lot of our students to work through, issues or, things of concern. And so, Jonte, I'm looking for you on the screen, but I see your slide is up. And so we'll jump in. Very similar. Just wanted to hear from you about measures we can take to ensure students are supported within their building, in particular when they're addressing issues of racism.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. Can you see me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay. So thank you so much for having me. In addition to being a middle school counselor at Short Punt Middle School, a great deal of my background is actually in Title I schools and schools with large disadvantaged populations. So I just want to make it very clear that, I feel very confident in being able to speak from a variety of lenses. I'm also a member of the board of directors for the Virginia School Counselor Association. So it's just nice having the background of being able to represent the voices of school counselors, not only within Henrico, but really from all over the state of Virginia. I'd like to just kind of piggyback on Ashley's sentiments about professional ethical codes. And I want to highlight and point out that Henrico school counselors follow ASCA, the American School Counselor Association's mindsets and behaviors as an ethical code. So This code really has many lenses, but I want to just highlight and point out 3 in particular as they relate to our topic tonight. And you can also see those on the slide. So access is what I plan to speak to, systemic change, and social justice. So in terms of access, Mindset 4 outlines that every student should have access to a school counseling program. In terms of equity, it is the expectation that every student should have access to not only a school counselor, but a comprehensive program. So they should have access to individual counseling, to group counseling, to the socio-emotional domain, the career and academic support domains. They should have access to all of that. In terms of systemic change, the Behavior Professional Foundation number 9, and actually there's a link there for the whole scope of our Ask a School Counselor Professional Standards and Competencies that you can refer to if you are especially interested. But systemic change is part of what we do, and that is through the implementation of the school counseling program. And I kind of saved the best for last. So the ethical code requires that we operate from a social justice equity lens. And what that means is I hear a lot of whenever racism and inequity comes up in conversation, I do hear a lot of not only educators, but just people in society saying things like, I don't want to get political. If you are a school counselor, it is part of your ethical code to address from a social justice equity lens. So there's no such scapegoat as I don't want to get political because it's not about politics. It's about speaking up for students, and especially those in marginalized populations. I also want to point out just some kind of glows of the school counseling profession. We have the ability to be creative, dynamic, and create memorable approaches for students. We are innovators. We do work closely with the students and are in many schools, not all, but in many schools, we are the only full-time mental health professionals that are there every day, all day. And we work in collaboration with our wonderful school social workers and psychologists. But I know many times we are part of that team of helping to create those creative interventions, and we have that ability to do that. We also are able to be at the table for behavior interventions. I know Dr. Noel spoke a lot about behavior and a lot about student support, and we have the ability to be a part of those discussions with the rest of our school-based mental health staff. I kind of want to jump back to my note about school counseling versus guidance counseling. We are often referred to as guidance counselors, and other than it just being an outdated name and an outdated title for what we do, the role is really outdated. When we were many years ago, guidance counselors, we were more navigating from a vocational lens. So we were leading and guiding students to their career of choice. Well, now our job encompasses so much more than that. We are mental health professionals. We are advocates. We are collaborators with administration, with parents. And I just wanted to point out, if you ever hear a school counselor correct you and saying, nope, it's not guidance, it's school, that is why. It's because our job encompasses so much more than that of the guidance counselors of the past. So that's just kind of us as a profession. And in terms of district-wide, these are just some programs that as Henrico school counselors we have participated in the past. And I won't go through the list altogether, but I want to kind of just talk about and highlight some of the programs. The first 2 bullet points, Mix It Up at Lunch Day and No One Eats Alone Day, specifically target diversity and inclusivity. And they are planned by school counseling staff to be a learning experience for students. And that is K through 12. So elementary, middle, and high schools, counseling staff all take part in promoting and organizing those programs. We are also very connected as a district department of school counselors in professional learning. And, our job continuously changes, and we are having to really be creative and think outside the box. We are not exempt even now as we approach a very unconventional school year, and really having to think about how can we best serve students? How can we use a multimodal approach to giving students the access to school counseling services that they deserve, that they need, and that they are, quite frankly, entitled to. And then we also have some programs that are specifically dedicated to addressing discrimination, kindness, and also career and future planning. There is tons of research out there as to the amount of advantage there is for students that have access to a school counselor in terms of college and career readiness, and being able to really create some concrete plans for after graduation.
Awesome. Jonte, thank you. I'll have to share, I had a fact check and when you shared about the guidance counselor versus school counselor. So I'll have to say, I've been privy to learn a lot as I've been doing a few of these different panels. Thank you for sharing so much information, especially some of those district-wide initiatives that are happening. And I think what I'll do now, because we've had quite a few questions to come over, I am going to ask folks if you can stay on for extra 10 or 15, because we want to try to address them. Dr. Mans, I know you have to go on time, is what I was told. So I want to get to your questions first.
Okay, I have another meeting.
Okay, so I'll just...
I'm every single night this week until, so.
I'm sure. So I'll jump in, just with some of the questions that came in. Again, thank you so much to our panelists and showing all of the work that's happening in various departments. And so I'll share out. So I think this one is specific to you, Dr. Mann. So this one is probably an easier one. Are the courses that you discussed, they're all in Schoology, correct?
Well, some of you had to sign up through ERO. So there's classes that are on, I think it's called HCPSU. And then so many of them are in Schoology. I mean, they're the platform in which they're ran off of in Schoology, but you have to sign up through ERO for many of those.
Okay. So if that was your question, just, go about signing up that way. And I know I saw some very interesting topics that were out there. So that was one. Another question or comment came up about our Equity Ambassadors program. Currently, the Equity Ambassadors program is structured to provide students with training for creating conversations around inequitable problems they have within their schools. How is the county evolving the program to provide the students a greater voice in creating change within their schools and working directly with policymakers or the county in general?
That's such a great question. So, it's interesting that in this time, the equity ambassadors have taken on a life of their own. So, how you want them to be leaders and you're educating them, but you don't really know what happens when they go home with it. Yeah. But in every single space that students have arrived at, my equity ambassadors have been there and they have been at the forefront of those conversations. And so I just want to applaud them because I am amazed at how they have owned this work and have taken the things that, these little nuggets that I get, that we've given them and have made them so much larger. So let me just first say, you got to acknowledge, folks, I believe in giving roses in the living. I got to give them their roses because they are doing some amazing work and are pushing the boundaries of it. And so I say that first. So one of the things is that we're doing is that we are working closely to really educate our principals during so I think I mentioned to you all, we have equity teams at all of our high schools, and we are looking to have equity teams at all of our middle schools. We're doing training. So our goal this year, pre-COVID, was that we would have equity ambassadors at middle as well. So it wouldn't just be high school, that they would actually have them in middle, but that did not happen. And so we are holding that off because I really think it's important that that's a face-to-face opportunity. So I say that to say is that we are educating our principals about the power of advocacy that these students have. And so really supporting our principals more about inviting these students to the table around conversations that are happening in their schools. And so I think it starts there, because it's one thing for us to empower our students, but if we don't make sure that leadership appreciates the amazing power that they have and that how important that their voice is at the table, then it's no use to me just to be empowering them, right? Because then they run up against something. So part of what we're doing this year is making sure that our school leaders really appreciate who our equity ambassadors are and what they're open to do. And one thing I want to say about my equity ambassadors is that my equity ambassadors are diverse. These students come from every single part of your school. When we created it, I said, I want leaders, and I don't care if they're the top students. I don't care if they're a student that got suspended last week. If they're a leader in your school, that's who you need to sign up. And I need them to be representative of our diverse student body. And I need them to come from very key groups. Yeah. So when I say that is that they are the ones who are sitting at the tables with the principals. So now it's not just the students who are the quote unquote elite. It is the students who are true leaders in their buildings, and they're the ones that the principals should be conversating with and hearing and engaging their student voice. So I guess to say to your response, Adrian, is we are working to do some virtual work to continue to empower our students virtually. And that was one of our discussions today, like how do we do it and do it well? Right. But more importantly, I would say that we are really working to empower our school leaders to understand how they can take advantage of this amazing voice that they have at their schools and make sure that they're listening to them.
I appreciate that. I think about, even if I'm personally reflecting, when you come into leadership, often it may be when you go away to college, right? You did a little bit in high school or middle school, but a lot of times it happens when you leave home after you graduate. And so what I really love is the rich opportunity and experience that the equity ambassadors are able to get, especially considering all that's happening right now. So I'm with you on a big applause for our equity ambassadors, and even having talked to them a little bit more over the last few weeks, just huge gratitude for them for staying committed to the work at such a younger age as well. So Monica, my last question for you, because I know you have to go. Not okay. Sure if you will have an answer for this one, but the question is around, give me a second. Is there a plan to achieve equity enrollment in the gifted program?
So again, COVID has messed up many things in my equity life, because I got schedules and I'm a one-woman department. And so when you mess up my schedule, it messes up a lot. So my EDAC committee actually was taking on a review of the gifted program. That was their spring. I don't know if you all know, please go back and look. My EDAC committee did an amazing job reviewing our advanced placement courses and our specialty centers, and came up with some very wonderful recommendations. So please go back and look at that. And so this year we were focusing on our gifted program because we were in transition with leadership. And so we decided to hold off and do gifted as a standalone. And so anyway, so to say all that, to say it didn't happen, it didn't happen. We were unable to figure out how to access people and parents, because we really did I would say we dug deep to find information for the advanced achievement work. We did focus groups. We sent out surveys, we knocked on doors, like we did a lot to make sure that we really had a comprehensive understanding of the issue. We couldn't figure out how to do that during COVID in a way that was authentic. So I first off say that. Now, what we are doing is there is a new specialist who I have not met with. I'm supposed to be meeting with, I think, in the next couple of weeks, around where do we go from here? Because our hope was we would take it back up this fall, right? Because we didn't do it, but you know, situations are as they are, but we have to do something. The inequities are just egregious. But one thing that I really want to make sure that all of you all are aware of, because I just found this out, because you know what, with equity, they think you know everything equity. And so I got to go research all this stuff, because I don't know. I didn't know anything about gifted equity. So what I just found out in my reading to prepare myself for the work I thought we were going to be doing in the spring is that Charlotte, Virginia, is where gifted programming actually came from. And it actually came and was started per a letter that was written for one of the original women who started giftedness in Charlotte, so that we could have segregation. They wanted a very clear way to segregate students, but still get tax dollars to pay for it. And what amazed me is that she wrote the letter. Like, so it's one thing to think about it and to do it, but then you're so bold that you wrote the letter.
Wow.
And so it was very interesting to learn that. And so what I would say is that, again, doing my research, and then I'm reading a really good book that I recommend many of you all read, called Even the Rat Was White. Because one of the things that you will find, I don't know. I'm doing this clear thing in the back as my whatever. But anyway, it's called Even the Rat Was White. I'll put it in the thing. But what it's called, it's a historical view of psychology. But what has happened is we originally identify students based off of an assessment, an IQ assessment. Well, the originator of the IQ assessment himself said, you cannot authentically identify someone using this assessment if they do not come from the same lived experience.
There you go.
There's no comparative that can be done. So I would tell you that, as I don't have a clear answer of what we are going to do, those two ideas is how I'm showing up to my conversation in the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
Understanding that those two things right there are hurdles that someone has to help explain to me, because I can't understand the disproportionality to you explain to me how this IQ test is even authentic.
Yeah.
Or the fact that this is not inadvertently or advertently being used as a tool for segregation. So those two things are two things that are way heavy on me as we begin to even look at doing this work. So
yeah, I agree, Monica.
Yeah, thank you for that. I mean, I think you said it earlier, it is a journey. It is a continue, and sometimes the more you evaluate systems, you realize the oppression even within that system, right? And so thank you for doing the deeper digging. And I would love the EDAC recommendations. Are they on your website, Monica, if anyone wants to?
Website. Mm-hmm. They're on my website. And I'll tell you, please take a moment to look at them, because we really need advocates. Because it's one thing I tell people, I have influence, not power. So I can make all the recommendations in the world, but if no one takes them up, right? And so I do, I want to believe that many of the recommendations are being considered and are being taken up as much as we can see. But we really do need the external pressures of you all to know kind of what we're recommending, and so that you all can make sure that we advocate and ask. And I do want to shout out before I leave is that I really appreciate you explaining to me guidance counselor instead of school counselor. I just want to let you know that, because I struggled with that, because I would not be here had it not been for my guidance counselor, because she went down some roads with me. And so I really struggled with giving up the name, because I stand here today because of this woman who stood with me when I didn't have anyone else. So I just want to let you know that was a real hard gift for me. And
she was probably a school counselor, though, if she made that much impact on you. She wasn't doing guidance. She was she was being a school counselor.
I really do want to tell you how much I shout that out and appreciate that, Miss Mayo, because that was a great explanation, and I'm gonna do better.
Awesome. Well, I thank you. I think one of the challenges, and we have more questions if you all can stay with us, but one of the I think chances that we have now, a call to action, there are several recommendations, right? And there's work that's being done. If there's something that stands out to you, whether you're a staff member or whether you're a parent, attach yourself to it. Become an advocate, pair up with the staff person. I know I'm often interacting and talking to parents about the work that I'm doing because it has to be informed by those that it's going to impact. And so if you hear of something, especially all of these amazing questions, reach out to Monica's office, volunteer, just make sure that you attach yourself to something. Monica, thank you if you have to go. And just thank you for all of the insight that you provided this evening. I know that they dropped the link to the questions and answers in the chat, so you all please take that as well. So a few more questions, if we can at least go for 5 or 10 more minutes, you all. Dr. Noel, I'm looking to you because we had a few questions about SROs and things of the sort, and so I'll just read it off. What type of training specific to teenagers and our diverse populations of students do SROs receive? It's actually three questions. I just read it out.
Yeah.
How much impact does HCPS have in how the police department selects its SROs and their training? And if not, what problems does that possibly create? So essentially, what power does HCPS have in deciding what SROs are in the school? And then do we know what kind of training they go to interact with young people?
Well, I don't know exactly what kind of training they go to, but I know in the panel I was on with Pastor Cooper, Captain Mark Banks spoke about the selection process, and he says it's not haphazard that they decide who goes in. There's a process that they select which officers would be better to work with students, school-age students, and that you would have to think that it was definitely a careful process to get them in there, because you would not want, in my opinion, someone who's somewhat set in their ways when they think about how police should be versus someone who's going to be in a public school working with students from various cultures and backgrounds. You want someone who's going to be open-minded, not thinking arrest first, but certainly, dealing with the situation. Now, of course, if a student is breaking the law, the officer has to do what the officer has to do because they are police officers. But if it's a situation where it's not a violation of the law, then I don't expect that officer to go to handcuffs, pepper spray, taser first.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
This next question is going to be for Jonte. What can we do to ensure all counselors are doing the same thing? Some counselors feel that mental health is not their job and have said so. What do you say to that?
So first of all, I think a huge task at hand in the school counseling profession is standardization of the role of a school counselor. And that is actually at the VDOE and at the state level. It's something that is high on our priority list about the standardization of the role. I'm from a rural area. I'm from Martinsville, Virginia. And, certainly the role of a school counselor in those buildings with a smaller district is very, very different than my role in a school of 1,100 students. I think it's important to point out that there are multiple layers to that statement of that mental health is not our job. The way I like to approach the school counselor's role in mental health is almost like patient first. Okay, you go to patient first for things that are just impeding on your ability for your activities of daily living. Okay, you would go to the hospital if you were a burn victim. You would go to the hospital if you needed surgery. Okay, so school counselors are there as a first line of defense, but we are certainly not licensed to be therapists. If students are having trouble with focusing in class, if they're having trouble with things that are going on at home, we certainly can help them to address those in the short term. But if more intensive therapy is needed, we do have the ability and connections to refer out to community agencies? So I think that was a great question in kind of helping with that line. My caseload currently is 360 around students. So even though that we are trained in various mental health approaches, even though we are trained with mental health theories, the sheer caseloads that we manage make it very, very difficult for us to provide therapy, in addition to the fact that we're just not licensed in that way.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you for that. You all will do 2 more questions. I try not to typically go over, but it's interesting, even as we've done the community conversations, many have kind of geared towards some of these questions. So I just want to get all the insight while we can. But the other thing we know is this is just one conversation. The hope is that this continues, that you will challenge us, speak to your school communities, continue to reach out, because we don't have to come together in this setting to have these talks. But we'll do 2 more before we wrap up. So this one is for you, Dr. Noel. Is there a record kept whenever SROs have an encounter with our children? And I'll continue, it's a few statements. Are SROs being trained in de-escalation techniques, unconscious biases, special needs training, cultural biases, especially within the Black community? Lastly, and they mentioned a particular district where they found a white supremacist working as an SRO. What is being done to ensure these types of things do not happen again?
And I apologize if I sound like I'm avoiding it, but because I don't deal with selecting the SROs, but I do know from the conversation with Captain Banks and Lieutenant Colonel Tony from the Hcps that there are training going in for the SROs who go in the building. And I know that because there's such a push for dealing with these implicit bias issues, that there will be implicit bias training as well. Okay. As far as having a record, whenever a student, whenever any information is put into Power School for a Code of Student Conduct violation, there's a space in there to indicate whether or not the student was referred to law enforcement. And you have to put that, and those numbers are tracked by the state. Now I know there was a study done that said Virginia led the nation in referral to law enforcement. And that was misleading, because what it was is, like, if 2 students got in a fight, the principal told the police officer about it, the assistant principal may click yes, refer to law enforcement. When it was not referred to law enforcement, it was just shared with the SRO. So once another study was done to look at the difference, it dropped us down, way down in the states in the nation as far as reporting to law enforcement. So there had to be training in that. When it comes to what's referred to law enforcement and what's simply shared with your SRO in the building. If it's a drug offense, if it's a weapon, if it's anything dealing with distribution, yes, that's reported to law enforcement, and that's logged in by the state. So I because of what's going on in the nation, it has to be looked at when it comes to disparity and implicit bias, and why African American students are suspended almost 3 times that of their white counterparts. There has to be someone looking at that to determine why is this happening. It's not happening by accident, I can guarantee you that. So there must be something with the implicit bias. It must be something with the cultural disconnect, because I would hate to think that we have people in our buildings who are targeting our African American students.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And I think with that question coming up, what it leads me to dig deeper in is, and I think you mentioned Banks and Tony, really reaching over the aisle, right, to see what that training is.
Together.
Yes, absolutely. So I appreciate whoever
versus them mentality.
Yes. Yes. And so even as, we have panelists that come here, sometimes it leads you to other places to even share out what some of our findings are and what some of those questions are too, so that they can know our school communities are really concerned about what that training is.
Absolutely.
Last question, and we got several in, but I think you could probably speak to this, Ashley, and I can jump in too. But the question is, what resources are available to students who want to offer their perspectives and services to create these changes in their schools? I'll jump in from my perspective as family and community engagement. Just a part of, why we do what we do. It's really about centering voices of those who are most impacted in anything that we do. And so I'm often talking to families, parents across the spectrum, and also students too. And so oftentimes, if I interact with a student who wants to get involved, I look at it as my responsibility to know what resources are out there, what organizations are out there, what's happening in other departments, so that I can properly connect someone if they're looking to get more experience. I'll say, it does not fall lightly on me. A lot of what we've heard from students, even from these conversations, and really lifting up some of those student leaders, very similar to how we have our equity ambassadors program. Who are those leaders and students who want to get involved, and how can we connect them to a movement or some type of change to really keep them involved and looped in? So I would say email me. I'm always open to hear if that's your young person or maybe someone in your class, as you're going through your school year. Just connecting them is a great start. And then I look at it as my job to make sure that I'm connecting them to the right place to keep that spark going. Ashley, do you have any perspective as a social worker in schools about students who want to be involved in creating change?
So from my experience in the community, I work closely with the Richmond Association for Black Social Workers, and we have a young man in our organization by the name of Zuri Washington, who's been a powerful force in the Chesterfield area. So if there are students that are interested in forming their own type of social justice work within Henrico County, I can link them to him to get that student perspective on how to establish those networks in their own areas.
Awesome.
So if there are students that's interested in starting their own efforts, please send me their name so that I can link them with Zuri.
Okay. And Jonte, you've done something in your school community, right? Can you share about that?
So, well, there are lots of great opportunities in various school communities on the middle and high school level, even in the elementary level. I mentioned some of the programming, but the Henrico Heroes mentoring program provides a great safe space for students to connect with an adult. So that could be like just another ally that they have to talk to and to share their voice. It also creates some great cultural experiences for our students as well. No Place for Hate is in middle and high schools. It's a task force, and many schools have even developed distinctions for for the work that they do within that No Place for Hate space. I did want to just say something just kind of in closing in terms of working with students and helping them find their voice. I thought about the word sass, sassy. When we think of sassy, we think of assertive, we think of confident, we think of courageous. And that's what we want our students to be in terms of finding their voice. So I thought about like an acronym like SASS, S-A-S-S. And so when you are working with or talking to a student that is really trying to find their voice and speak up and learning to advocate for themselves, they need help with support. So that's S, advocacy, speaking up for themselves, because that's a life-ready skill that they'll need to develop and hone in for the rest of their life. And they'll need SS, a safe space to communicate, learn, and grow in. And I also think it's important, and Dr. Mans kind of shared on this a little bit, understanding that talking about racism, injustice, and equity is a journey for all of us. Just because I am a Black woman, a Black wife, a Black mother, does not mean that I have all the answers. And to be honest, I consider my journey in this space as just beginning. So a lot of this work in social justice is very, it's not new to me as a professional, but in it really being something that I'm specifically focused on in this space is new. And I'm very grateful for the opportunities I've been given in the space to learn and grow.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
It's necessary to have those courageous conversations, because the problem is not going to go away just because we avoid dealing with it.
Yes. Yes, indeed. I think you all, just those comments alone are a great wrap up to our evening. And that SAS is really sticking out with me. I tried to write that down to remember it too. To our panelists, thank you all so much for spending your time, for being so engaging and so transparent with our audience. I think that's what I have really appreciated about our community conversations. To our attendees who stayed on 30 minutes after, thank you for your commitment. We got through most questions, but not all. I do want to say I know there was a question about funding disparities, which is probably more likely for our school board members. And I do know we will have a school board member on our next conversation. But again, we log all of the questions that come on and they don't just fall at the end of the conversation. So just thank you all for being engaged. I think this conversation in particular provided a lot of insights with our schools and lets us know what we're working on, but then also what we need to continue working on, right? So thank you all for being so open and transparent there. This was 4 of 5, and so 5 of 5 is in 2 weeks, August the 3rd. We're going to have our final community conversation around this race and equity work, and that's going to be focused on community. We really have tried to pull out the different parts of the school community, which is students, family, actual schools, and community. So we'll land there. And so looking forward to some rich conversation about things that are happening outside of our schools. And as we have had a unique year, we understand how important that is. So we're going to ask you all to join us back here August 3rd, 6 o'clock. We will try to keep it to an hour, but I'll just say thank you all for joining us again and have a great evening and an awesome week.